Greetings and welcome back from the frozen tundra, or quickly freezing tundra of Sheffield Lake here, back on the shores of Lake Erie. Seems like we always come back to the lake. We live a few blocks from it and obviously spend a fair amount of time here with our boat and whatnot. And sometimes when we're just looking for a place, we always think for quiet solace, we wind up here, and yet many of these days it's not so quiet. We're glad you're with us. Today I want to share with you a little bit about the binary concepts of right and wrong that we seem to possess today. It occurs to me as strange as we go through these processes of what's right and what's wrong in our minds. We always get settled on the idea that what we think is always perfect in its rightness. However, if what we think is perfect in its rightness, then what you think or they think, depending on if we're a collective or not, must be what's wrong in its entirety. I remember taking in a conference some years back. I don't even remember who the speaker was in this, but I remember what his theme was, and I guess that's what makes him a great speaker, or maybe a good speaker, but not a great one, because I wish I could tell you so you could go buy his book. But I don't remember what his name was. But I remember what the theme was, and the theme was lifting up truth. And his purpose was that somehow we all seem to dwell so much in the binary concepts of black and white, right and wrong, that we lose sight of the idea that there are people that we can come in contact with that would bring us into some type of truth. In the 18th century, there was a Buddhist student, I guess. I don't really know that he should be considered a student. He was a poet who came along and studied for what many seem to think was a long, long time before he considered himself a teacher. In his travels and his pilgrimage after his initial teacher had died, he was caught at times saying, if I should wander to a point, and I'm paraphrasing because I'm so imperfect at remembering these things, if I should travel and at some point encounter a 100-year-old, or he might have even said 108-year-old teacher, we'll sit together and discover whether I have something to teach him or not. People thought that was awfully presumptuous of him. And yet when he was 80, he began to teach himself and became a teacher. And at that point he said, should I encounter an 8-year-old that has something to teach me, may I always stop and listen and learn. Such was his idea that wisdom comes in all different shapes and sizes. I guess I'm reminded of that particular person because Christ always seemed to challenge us to become like children in our innocence and our willingness to learn. Many people have doctrinally adopted his words, those words, into all kinds of different teachings and meanings and beings. That Buddhist student was a fellow by the name of Ryokan, and he became really sort of a famous poet from that. One of my favorites of his, and again, I forget these things too often, so please forgive me if I'm paraphrasing, was the concept. He said, look in all 10 directions of the universe. There's only one truth to be found. When you see clearly, the great teachings all become somewhat the same. Maybe even said the great teachers. What can ever be lost? What can ever be found or attained? If we attain something, the reality is it was there from the beginning of time. And if we lose something, the reality is that it's just hiding somewhere nearby. What Ryokan was talking about was the idea of living in the present, living in an awakened state where we are sensitive to the goings and comings of life around us. I have to say that as a Christian man, I was always raised with a fear or a misunderstanding, or rather the persuasion not to even seek wisdom from other sources or look at other people that might have truths. As a branded Christian, I even always thought that my subset had more truth, and I'm not going to dwell on that because we've talked about this before. I think in My God, Your God, Our God, I went into some detail on this concept. I want to raise you to something a little bit deeper today. The concept of being wide awake in the present. The concept that there are many that have something to teach, different ages, different ways, different backgrounds, and different eras, but the reality is that the truth lies in the present with us here today. We so often, it seems like we so often dwell in what's coming tomorrow in the future. No, we so often dream in what's coming tomorrow in the future and dwell in what's in the past, that we forget to live in what's the future and realize that there are truths here around us today, that there's work here for us to do today. I guess I got caught, just being perfectly honest with you, in the melancholy of today sometimes, in that we get so lost in the politics, people get so caught up in all these things, and again, this is not what I want to get from you today. Christ was such a teacher. He taught that if we become like children, we can draw near to who God is. And everybody, as I said, always talks about the innocence of that, but I guess I can't get to the concept of children without thinking about not knowing what I think I know, because children are many things. Children in their purity ask questions. Not a few questions, they ask a lot of questions. And even their questions tend to have questions. There's no end to the idea or the thirst for knowledge. And I think that Christ recognized that the people that he was dealing with in that time believed that they had all the answers, and so they weren't asking questions. I didn't bring my Bible out here, well, I have one, but I didn't bring it out here to read from you because I want to talk to you about these concepts. So many times in Christ's experience, he talked about the wise becoming fools or being revealed as fools, the learned ones seeming dumb, the seers being blind. I mean, all of these are concepts that he brought, and he'd always then bring in the little children and say, lest we become like these children, living in the moment, being willing to ask questions and recognize that we don't have all the answers, we're never going to understand who God really is. And so that's how I come to you today. I share with you a quote from a Buddhist. I'll share with you another from a Hindu. Mahatma Gandhi lived in the present. He lived in the same kind of consciousness. And he once made the statement that freedom is not worth having unless it contains the freedom to make mistakes. And I've talked to you about this often. Years ago, I was invited to speak at a conference, and I had a session entitled Free to Fail. And I think in that discussion, what I said was, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And led all these people down this path of saying, how fun would it be to live life in a way that it was just okay, as long as you were trying, as long as you were doing. And then, of course, the catch to that was, with God, not doing is worse than doing and making mistakes. And is it okay to make mistakes with God? Well, Christianity teaches that Christ gives us forgiveness while we're yet sinning. And if we have forgiveness while we're yet sinning, why are we so afraid to get out there and make mistakes? Christ also said over and over that it's the going and the doing that we find the truth, or we find God. We're not supposed to be following a dead God. We're supposed to be following a living God into truth. And to me, that means action. It means you can't just believe. If you say you believe but you don't do, then do you really believe? And if you're not doing because you're afraid of failing, then do you know who God is, even a little bit? Or do you accept that forgiveness that he promises to us all? It's interesting how we can come across these things. There's a quote that says this: "If you knew what I know about the power of giving, you would not let a single meal pass without sharing it." Isn't that a beautiful sentiment? If you knew what I know about giving, you wouldn't let a single meal pass without sharing. That was Buddha. I'm not going to try for his last name. He's got a lot of very interesting quotes, some that I think would draw you so close to the consciousness of Christ that for me it becomes hard to believe that God has not been trying to reach us as humans, to change our views from being so personally selfish about who we are, so bent on knowing what we know and being right in what we know, trying to bend us out of that. It's hard for me to believe that he hasn't been trying in different cultures in different ways, and we're just so stopped up in our own self-awareness and our own self-knowledge that we can't see it. Moses figured this out. Moses figured out that it's in us that we need to focus on truth, because God is here present. He's not dead. He's a part of who we are. In the 30th chapter of Deuteronomy, he challenges the children of Israel. He tells them, God's truth is in you. It's in your lips and in your hearts. It's something that you need to grasp onto and live and embrace and make a part of who you are. A very famous Christian coined a phrase that I'm going to use here too. Though her branding should be off for me, somehow her heart is so close to the heart of Christ that I just can't help but enjoy her sentiments. She says, "Yesterday is gone, and tomorrow has not yet come. We only have today, so let us begin." And that was Mother Teresa, who, if you know who she was, she lived her life in the spirit of giving each day, every day, all day, without fail. If you talked to or went back through any of these people that I've quoted today, they would give you their core, and their core principle is founded in a simple four-letter word known as love. The core principle of Christ. The core principle of God. See, it's so interesting to me that we live our lives looking through window panes that have dust on them. And I don't want to say that all dust is bad, because sometimes dust is our experiences, but they cloud or they make a different perception of our judgment of who Christ is. But it's that dust that we focus on more and more as we consider who God is. We have a hard time looking at other people in the world without judging them through our experience, and then thinking about them based on some past thought or deed. We have a hard time considering God without considering the future. And when we consider the future, we begin to dream. I guess I could bring in John Lennon there, the dreamer. He's not the only one. But see, there's a problem with dreaming too, because when you're dreaming, you're lost in the present. You're not acting, you're hoping. The dust in our windows tends to cloud our vision of what we're looking at today and create prejudices and things that block us from doing what we should be doing today. And so I really see these people, these Mother Teresas and different figures from the past who seem to connect on something beyond themselves, as people that begin to wipe the dust off their windows and look at life today in the present clearly. It's obvious to me, it's apparent that Christ called us to do this. And yet we still tend to think of what he called us to as some future goal. And that makes us dreamers. What he's really doing is calling us to the here and now and the today. My challenge to you this week is to take up Mother Teresa's words. Yesterday is gone, and tomorrow has not yet come. What we have is today, and it's time to begin. Thank you all. We love you, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.